Are you looking for a relaxing art project to try this holiday season? In this video, I'll show you fun and unique watercolor pencil techniques, combining translucent lettering and even leaves with rich, dense pine details. These contrasting effects are easy to achieve and perfect for experimenting with new ideas while unwinding this Christmas. Plus, there's a free outline to download and trace, so anyone can join in. Let's go ahead and get started. If you're using the printable download that I provided, you're going to want to go ahead and trace it onto your watercolor paper first. I admit my lines are pretty faint right now, so you're going to definitely want to take advantage of that outline. But because I'm just using this as a guideline, I'm totally fine with how light it is. I'm going to come in first and do the lettering before I lose it, because if I kind of rub my hand on here a lot, it's going to be gone. So I'm just grabbing my black watercolor pencil, and I'm going to quickly go over the letters with my watercolor pencil. So what I'm going to do is just do a solid straight line where it's a single line, right? And then I'm just going to trace the outlines. The one thing I want to avoid is having my black kind of run right through the thickness of the letters. That makes sense there. So for my joy, I didn't put the line right through like that. So I'm going to try and do that with all of my letters, and then I will be back to add the water. So I've got my number 6 brush, I've got my water nice and handy to me, my water jar is right here, and then I've got my paper towel for blotting. And so I'm going to come in here quickly and just wet this nice fine line. I also have my pencil handy because I'm probably going to do a little bit of special effects with it, so I'll show you in a quick sec. So when I do this larger shape, or this open shape, I'm just going to fill it in with water, and then I'm going to drop a little bit of the black in some spots, just so that we kind of get some gradation happening and variation within the letter, and it's not just solid black as if we just used a black pen. There's nothing wrong with just using a black pen, and if that's what you'd rather do than do the watercolor pencil, no reason you can't. The watercolor pencil is a little bit more challenging, and you can see as I'm doing this that it's getting a little bit more of an organic painterly look. So I'm basically just wetting things, and then when I feel like I need to add a little bit of that extra touch of black, I will. And if I feel like things are getting a little too saturated, I'll just go ahead, wash my brush, dry it again, and jump back in. So some of these words I'm going to want them to be a little bit less saturated, and some I'm going to want to have them a little bit more saturated. You can see I kind of crossed over the L when I was tracing, which is something I didn't want to do, but you know what? That's an opportune time to just add a little more black to that section and create a gradation. So I'll just throw some water at the bottom, black at the top, and just kind of let that flow, and it has a beautiful kind of watercolor look. Joy to the world, the Lord is come. This is such a beautiful reminder of the reason that we're celebrating. The fact the Lord has come, the fact he left the glories of heaven and came to this earth as a man to make a way for me to have peace with God, brings hope, joy, and comfort to me. I hope and pray that the wonders of his love for you fills your heart with joy as we celebrate this Christmas season. So what I'll do is I'll do one element at a time. So I'll do all the leaves and all the berries, whatever. That way you can watch me demonstrate how to do that element, and then I'll speed the video up as I go through the whole wreath. So let's just go ahead and do one of these leaves. Right now I'm using this brown color from Faber-Castell, and this one is called Caput Mortuum. It's kind of a different name, but I do like this color of brown, so I'm going to use that. I'm going to cover my words so that I don't mess things up on them. And then what I'm going to do is grab my water and go ahead and fill the shape in, kind of the way we did with the lettering, so we get that translucent effect still. So I'm going to come up to the edge and let that bleed around. So I really want to get the shape wet first, then come to the edge and just kind of gently massage that color in so that it kind of bleeds around, and we get this sort of translucent effect that we also had in our letters. We're not going to have this everywhere, but I want to do a few elements with this. And then I've got this reddish pinkish color by Faber-Castell, and I'm just going to take a little bit of it off with the tip of my brush and drop it in to the tips of these leaves. And then it's going to just kind of bleed around ever so slightly and give us, again, the watercolor look. You could do it with that same color brown, but I wanted to have just a little bit more of a rosy color to these leaves. Let's try one more. If you want to, you could also create like a vein in the center of your leaf. It's not necessary. You might like the look, you might not, so let's add a vein to this one and you can decide what you like better. And maybe with this one, I'll throw a tiny bit of the same brown color in there as well. So you can see what it looks like with less of the pink and more of the brown. You might like that effect. I think I kind of like the pinky look, so I'm going to just grab a bit more of my pinky color. Again, this is a deep pink, and I'll drop it in a few places, either at the tip of the leaf or close to the edge of the leaf. So again, we have that translucent look in the center, and then the deeper colors towards the edge of the leaf. So I'll go ahead now and quickly fill in the rest of these leaves with this technique. Once again, water first, move into your darks, and then finally drop a little bit of that pink color into the tip. Now what I did is I went ahead and grabbed the hairdryer and gave this a quick blast of heat. That way all my leaves are dry before I come in and start doing the berries. So for the berries, what we're going to do is come in with our bright red. This one is a little bit of a warm red, or kind of a little tiny touch to the orangey side. It's maybe more like a poppy red. And I'm going to come in here and do all these little circles with it. And then I'm going to fill it in on almost the whole thing, except I'm going to leave one side kind of empty for a highlight. So basically go around the outside of the berry and then fill most of it in, and then just leave a small area that's completely white. Then once I've done a few of those, I'm going to be coming in with either my same brownish color I used before and do a little crescent shape on the far left side, or kind of the lower side of each of these berries. And as you could tell, this brown is a little bit of a purplish brown. If you don't have a brown like that, you could also grab a dark purple, such as a red violet, and do your shadow with a red violet or a burgundy color. So I'll just go around and repeat that with all of my berries. All right, so for wetting our berries, I've got my paper towel nice and handy. Use whatever size brush you're comfortable with. You probably want something smaller for these. And then what you're gonna do is come around and wet the lighter reds first. And if you want to leave that little highlight completely alone, you can. And then come fill in the darks just like that. And that might be the easiest way to go. If you want your highlight to be a little bit blended out, this is what you can do. You can wet the highlight, then move into your reds, but you'll find that highlight kind of starts to fill in and it's a little bit less intense. What you could do at that point, if you want to lift some of it out, is you could just grab a piece of paper towel, kind of make it into a little tip, and just like kind of dot the highlight out. That might be more work than it's worth though. You might want to just leave them white. You can do what you prefer. I kind of like the way it looks when it gets wet because it's a softer highlight, but it can sometimes be a little harder to control. You just need to be drier with your brush if you want to keep that highlight nice and soft. So just keep that in mind. You can decide whether to wet it or not. Just be aware, if you wet it, you might lose it, and you might just need to come and grab a little tiny piece of paper towel and just blot it out. And as you can see here, I keep dabbing things off on my paper towel so that I don't end up pulling my dark reds into my highlight or into my light reds. The other thing I do is whenever I feel like my brush is getting a bit saturated with that red pigment, I wash it and I dry it off so that I'm coming in with a fairly dry, I should say damp brush. It's not super dry, just so that I don't drown these little berries. It's a fine line with watercolor pencil how wet you want at any given time. And it also depends on how much detail you want to maintain. So it's one of those things you get a feel for as you go, and you'll change your approach based on how much detail you want to maintain. And as you can see, these berries are more intensely colored, and so they have a little bit less of that watercolor look. And yet once we blended them, they look really pretty, don't they? Before I move on to my greens, I wanted to go ahead and give everything a quick dry with the hairdryer so that I don't end up, again, rubbing my hand through wet pigment. So everything's dry, and I'm going to come in and start working on the leaves. For this next leaf, let's go ahead and get that same kind of translucent watercolor look that we got on our red leaves. This one will be a little bit more challenging. It's got some character to it, but you're just going to go ahead and outline. Then I'm going to come in with my water, and I'm fairly wet. My brush is pretty wet this time. Ooh, I'm dragging some red in there. That's okay. I'm just going to go ahead and wet this shape. I don't imagine the red's always going to bleed off my berries, but I'll have to be careful about that. And just go ahead, wet it, and just kind of let that green from the edges kind of mingle into the center. And then I have here both my green that I outlined with as well as a dark indigo blue. So I'm going to drop a little bit of both of these colors into here. And I'm just going to kind of do it again near the top so that I maintain some of that translucency there that I've got from putting so much water. You can kind of see I've got a watercolor look there. And let's just do one more. So I've gone ahead and wet it, drop some greens into it. Some of my blue, and then I'm just going to just gently kind of let those colors mingle around. I'm just moving them around ever so slightly. I don't want to overblend here because that's where we're going to lose our watercolor look, but that's good for that one. I really like how these leaves are turning out so beautifully. I just like the watercolor look that we're achieving here. So I'll just go ahead and repeat these steps on my leaves. But since everything's looking fairly wet right now, I'm going to go ahead and dry it, and then I'll be right back. All right, so for our cedar, we're going to do a center branch. And then I'm just doing these little curly things, if you will, like tiny little, I don't know if you want to call them leaves, foliage, whatever, on cedar. I guess it's not a leaf, right? But just do these little curly things kind of on these branches. And we're just going to go around and do that to all of our cedar. Or if you've traced my printable, you'll be able to just fill those shapes in just with kind of a scribbling curl motion. Finally, in the center of all these, I'm going to be putting some of my indigo blue. So this is a deep dark color, and I'm just putting a little bit, again, using that same scribbling motion. I'm just kind of deepening the center of these shapes. Now, because I want to have quite a bit of water control in my shapes, I'm going to be working fairly dry. So I'm going to wipe my brush off, and then I'm going to come into the outer parts of these little bits of foliage and just kind of like bounce my brush around, as you can see me doing here. So I'm kind of using this bouncing motion to fill it in or really just blend it. I'm not really letting it flow too much. I'm really just blending it, and it's just deepening and darkening things. So I'll just go around the whole wreath and fill these in, and then I will be back. All right, last but not least, we finally get to do our pine. Everything is dry, and I'm gonna go in here now. I have a couple of browns. I got a really nice dark brown as well as a burnt sienna brown, and I'm gonna use these for the stems. So I'm going around the wreath, drawing in these little stems or branches, but you're gonna also notice I'm creating some of my pine needles with this brown color, and I would actually recommend you don't follow me into doing this, or at least don't use nearly as much brown as I did, because once I go to blend later, you're gonna notice all of my pine end up being a little bit too brown or a little olivey green, and so I have to add extra layers of green to get them dark enough, which ended up just being more work than it had to be. So I would say put less brown than what you see me doing here. And while I'm at it, I'm also putting some little stems for my berries. So I'll just go around the whole wreath and fill these in, and then I will be back. So now we get to go over all of this with our green. I start with heavier pressure at the pine branch, and then just kind of like almost swing or like let my wrist almost like fling the pencil a little bit out to either side. Super easy. And if you want to practice this again on a scrap of paper, you can. There's not much to it. Why don't I just show you on this scrap of paper that I was using? I'm just going to use this same green and just show you. So that was my center branch. I know I don't do the center in green, but I'm going to just do it that way this time. And then I'm just going to do these little things kind of flinging out from that center branch. And you can see I'm not being perfect. It's actually better not to be perfect. As I come closer to the end of that stem, I kind of fling a little bit downwards, or I guess I should say upwards in this case, along with the point of that. And then as you come this way, you can have your branches, or pine needles, sorry, kind of going in any which direction. Kind of some can be a little more this way, some can be a little more this way, kind of overall going like this, but you don't want them perfectly lined up. You want them just kind of a little bit more random. Random actually makes it more natural and organic looking. Now that one's pretty full looking, like as far as I probably didn't need that many pine needles, but I think you get the idea. So that's what I'm doing everywhere. And a lot of these are on a slightly smaller scale. Let's go ahead and do some with this more Christmassy green. So I'll go around the whole wreath doing this, and then I will be back to add the water. All right, so everything is ready to add water now. So I've got a wet, or I should say damp brush. I've got my water right here handy. And I've got my paper towel, and I want to give myself a little bit of space to swing. So I'll be probably using a little bit of shoulder motion just so that I can kind of get just a very nice gentle swing in my arm as I wet these branches. So rather than start in the lightest area, I tend to start in the same way that I started drawing these, and that is at the center or at the stem. And then I like to swing out. And I actually will swing a little bit beyond the branch itself. And if you look up really close there, you can see that my water is extended that little bit and created a really soft pine look. So as you can tell, once I finished my branches, things were definitely more on the olive green, burnt sienna side than probably most people would like for Christmas. So I'm going to go ahead with my darkest green, the one that we've been using most of the time by Faber-Castell. And I may even throw a little more Christmas green, but we'll see. I'm going to go into the places that I'm really feeling it's really olivey green or brown and just go a lot heavier there, which is fine. I don't mind having more contrast in this piece. And I'm just going to do some really heavy needles right on top of the areas that are just too brown. And that will show you how you can go about fixing things when you're working in watercolor pencil and you've done layering and discovered, whoa, things ended up a little bit more vibrant or bold in a certain color than you were intending or expecting. So I'm just going to go ahead and blend out the rest of my dark green that I've just added. And just know, pine branches don't have to be so complicated if you don't overdo the brown in the first place. The other thing you can do to push your greens is to grab your watercolor pencil and just use your brush and rub a little bit of it off, or a little bit of the pigment right off the pencil. And then you can drop it in on top of your areas that are too brown. And that's another way you can quickly fix things. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope this video has brought a little taste of God's beauty, peace, and joy into your everyday life, that it enhances your Christmas celebration, and that you've been inspired to continue enjoying your own creative journey. Have a Merry Christmas. I look forward to connecting again in the new year. Bye.